Okay, welcome back. So we're going to do some examples purely just of the gesture stage so that when you're working through your figure constructions, you have more to reference. So I've talked about it a little bit, or about the approach to drawing gesture a little bit in our overall lecture, but this just gives you an isolated look into how I'd start those figures to get them laid out and going. Gesture is obviously a much more complicated subject than what I'm showing here. This is more on the practical end. So I think of gesture as a process of abstraction, drawing away what you find to be the most important elements of the figure to summarize in brief with the start of your drawing. So that's a whole discussion and explanation in of itself. So keep that in mind, but this will be just the kind of the purely practical side. And what I'm going to do is 4 male, 4 female, and then each one is representative of a different view. So there's a back, a side, a front, and then there's also some poses that represent common questions. Like gesture always gets the same questions. How do I draw a front view, back view? What happens when it's foreshortening? Pretty much, yeah, those are pretty much the 2 big ones. So we'll start here with this back view. You know, what I usually do with gesture is focus on these big asymmetrical rhythms. But because, as we looked at in the course, the process is really step by step or linear, I don't worry about proportion or a lot of the big kind of fine principles of what's going to happen at the end, because it's just a setup, it's just a start. So you don't have to overthink it. So my approach again is just a head, and I'll write it here just for your reference again. So head would be my shape. And there's any number of gestures too. Like this is another thing that's worth pointing out. There's too many. You know, there's Loomis, force gesture, Bridgman, James McMullen high focus drawing, Glenville Poo. You know, you name it, the list never ends. So there's not a right or a wrong. There's just what you like and what you gravitate to and how you want your style to kind of be facilitated by a start. I use the analytical approach for gesture in what I'm showing you today because it's most consistent with our class. But there's, you know, I would use maybe a different approach for shading, something that's more shape-based. So develop your own. My approach is head, and then I'll go through 4 lines that create the different directional movements of the spine. So cervical, thoracic, the stretch of the body, and then lumbar. After that, I'll find a line for the pelvis, and this is almost always on the weight-bearing side. It doesn't have to be. It just, you know, none of these are hard and fast rules. It's just something to get you going. Pelvis, then step 4 would be my weight leg. Somebody was asking me the other day about, you know, well, how much should I? Someone told me to draw more rhythm like Andrew Loomis. Well, that's great. You should read his book. There's a lot of really interesting ideas in there. But for Loomis, rhythm doesn't come up as a discussion until like page 90 something. You know, his approach, at least in the beginning of figure drawing for all it's worth, is primarily mannequin. Proportion is first. So rhythm is an expression in his of kind of contour relationships, or like the large relationship of a contour from one form to another. But he has a great description of gesture as this abstract principle of line, and he diagnoses his gesture with this kind of summary of all the different types of line he uses. But as far as a gesture, or how we traditionally think of gesture, that quick, rapid setup, it's much later in Loomis. It's almost like a double check or a triple check toward the end of the drawing. At least that's how I read it. So step 5 would be support. Step 6 would then be arms. I do the arms last. So that's the basic breakdown. You know, the head is a shape. The spine, I would use 4 lines, like I've already put there. Pelvis is 1. The arms and legs usually each is 2 to 3. So in total, what does that give us? 13 to 17 lines is like a way that you could think about the maximum amount of energy or effort you're putting into your gesture drawing. So I have my head, and I'm just going to go through that list with you. After that, cervical. So why would I make a line like that? I know some of you are probably thinking, well, like I see the neck, and the neck is doing this instead, and it's, you know, this really interesting shape, and there's lots of bulky muscles there. Well, the problem with that for me would be it's already a shape, and my rule early on, especially as a student, is if you don't know what it is, then don't draw it. Because then we all know that we kind of like just phone stuff in, just make it up. So I always try to at least learn what I'm drawing prior to drawing it, or have some kind of idea. You don't have to be an expert. So this line tells me the most important feature of that neck. That neck is moving at that diagonal axis. And even if you don't think that that's the case, I always over exaggerate a gesture line for a diagonal. Because what's most important for me in gesture is movement, and the line that conveys movement the easiest and the clearest is a diagonal. Verticals are stiff, horizontals are passive. So this is why I really like gesture, because it's just abstract art. I kind of connect back with my graduate degree of thinking just about abstraction, which is fun. Okay, cervical's done, that's the neck. Then what's the thoracic doing? This way. So I would say it's moving that direction. And then how do I know if this so far is right or wrong? The most important thing for me is that every line chains or handholds so that you're creating a continuity of visual motion, right? Direction and integration of your parts. So think of it this way. Every line represents, in its simplest terms, a part. Every spacing or negative space where those two lines have that slight handhold, that can represent a joint. And this maybe helps you, or may help you, be more accepting or willing to think so abstractly. Because the third common question that I forgot is, when you make that gesture line, which part of the body is it? It's not a contour. It's just an idea about how to indicate and lay down the parts of the body. So that seems to be like the biggest hurdle in gesture when I talk with people, is people are very invested in the drawing being the thing they're drawing. It's never going to be that. It's disappointing, I know, but the drawing is always just a drawing. It's always going to be a drawing first. So here we're making drawings. Think of it this way. Maybe we're just drawing abstract diagrams of movement for the time being. And later on, as we move through the progressive stages of our figures, we can resolve them, right, into having more concrete feelings of weight or perspective or muscle. So I know that's a lot of build-up or explanation, but sometimes it's necessary just to shift people out of thinking that it has to be something. It doesn't have to be anything other than what it is at the moment. So that's thoracic. After this, that's my stretch. So if we were looking at the front view, I usually aim this line to be pit of the neck to bottom of the pelvis. So that's kind of the stretch of the large portion of the rib cage down through and into the pelvis. And then lumbar spine goes this way. So if we kind of turn this to be profile for the moment, what I'm trying to capture with that gesture is the asymmetries, the two-dimensional asymmetries of the head, neck, rib cage, and pelvis, and how they all have this different lean. I think it's something that when we're drawing, quote unquote, more realistically, or contouring and trying to copy the figure, we completely miss. Because it's really hard to see, it's subtle. So at this stage, again, I'm really drawing more what I know and how I want to design it so that it impacts the later stages of what I do. Spine's done. Now we're going to do pelvis. So here's a wrapping line, and then I'm just going to do a line over there for that side of the pelvis. So that breaks my rule. That's not the weight-bearing side, but here I'm just trying to give some indication. And more important, I want to make sure that rhythm continues, right? So that line is offset and flows into this line, right? So that everything still has that greater sense of continuity. Okay, so you could just see check, check, check. I just go through each number, work my way down. So we're at the weight. The lines we've used so far are purely asymmetrical. So that's one, we'll say that's A. And then B, the only other line type that I'm using are wrapping lines, or surface contours, or volumetric contours, whatever you want to call them. These are great for summarizing three-dimensional directions, but it's like a shorthand. They also have a nice function of maybe gathering some of the more disparate, longer asymmetrical lines underneath. But I never really will do one or just two per part, let's say, 2 or 3 per part. Just something quick so that you don't have to overinvest. And so now I'm going to go to the weight leg. So maybe I could build off of this line, and then let's do femur. Whenever it's a weight-bearing leg, I use more lines because I feel like it sets up the idea that there's more energy or there's a greater force on it. I don't mean that in the Michael Matesi sense, but it just feels like with more lines closer to straight and maybe even a darker touch, a darker pen pressure, that it feels more important to the drawing as a whole, compositionally. The supporting leg, which is step 5, so if we move now, what you can do to offset that would be maybe now start to think Loomis. You could sample in some Loomis. Loomis would say big relational lines. So maybe I take this large stretch of the spine and swing that into a really long cascading S-curve. This sets up a difference to me, textural difference even, weight difference. This has weight, this feels passive. But this is purely notational. You know, gesture is just for you. Nobody will ever see it. So it's your language, it's how you want to set it up. You should sample from lots of people and kind of find what works for you. I'm just trying to give you as transparent a look into what I'm thinking about, as scary as that is, so that you have complete access to how I use stuff and how you may want to use it or not. You have to make gestures of feet. So I see that left out quite a bit. The way I think of feet is, let's draw it down here. Your foot's a basic triangle, something like this. And then if I want different angles or views, I try to hold on to this front area. So let's say that's the front view, maybe like that's the big toe split. If I have a 3/4 foot, I'll move that here and then extend that line. But see, my foot gesture never goes past, let's say 4 to 5, right? But don't hold me to it. Sometimes I'll say that and then people will be like, I see 6. I'm like, I wasn't trying to lie to you. It just happened. So this would be 3/4. Profile, I'll take it out completely. So let's put like a little profile one here. So that gives you, a way to make contact with the ground. Let's say put a P for a profile. 3/4 back, let's show that on this one. So 3/4 back, I'm going to do the same trick as the front, but make that the heel, and then send the direction of the foot this way. So it's the reverse of the 3/4 front there. So see how it keeps a nice sense of simple rhythm, but it still allows you to get that more accurate placing of the foot as it relates to that ground plane. So this would kind of be let's just make a little square here. I am trying to think of this in reference to a plane or a square. The other one, so that would be one of these basic views, but squashed and stretched. So if we drew his other foot there, that one would be, so it's still the back view, that's the heel, but now I'm going to show under. So let's say under, S-curve for the front, and then that'll become a pinch at the bottom. So you can still keep that pinch stretch idea. So just like this. So if we put that here, put a little higher. Another good thing that gesture allows is a reworking, a thinking, a not precious attachment to the state of the drawing as it is. And here's that. That'd be that ground plane. And then for a back, I would like to use the scapula as ways to build out of this rhythmic nest that we've created around the torso. You don't have to, but like you could see this line here would be that medial border of the scapula. So we'll do a C curve. Notice how that curve relates to that front stretch. And then from here, just like the legs, so 2 to 3 lines per. It's usually 3 lines when the arm or leg is bending, because I'll do, a little curve for the elbow. So let's say maybe this could be 1 little curve here to redirect the eye, because that's a fast movement. How do I get the eye to go back that way? Maybe a little bend, and then, what's this shape? There. On the other side, let's do a scapula here. That builds off our thoracic on the back, deltoid. Here's humerus. And then here's the forearm. Done. So that would be a gesture. Lots of explanation, but sometimes the things that are the simplest require more explanation than the obvious, right? Like a muscle is what it is.